When I think of the situations where I felt most uncomfortable in my life, it's not anxiety or sadness that comes up. It's shame. Feeling the urge to hide under the blanket or wishing the ground would open and swallow you up because you simply can't endure this discomfort. Let's talk about these self-conscious emotions and why they also made me feel more confident than ever before. Hey there, welcome back. I'm Eva, psychologist and head of content at FlowLab, a mental fitness app that helps you achieve peak performance and more flow states. Before we begin, if you want to support us, I'd be very grateful if you give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. This helps that other people can see the video too and for us to produce more video content in the future. All right, let's start with an icebreaker. You know these hot summer days that are only survivable with a fan within the radius of 3 meters? Yeah, it was definitely not one of those. And still, I had the biggest sweat stains on my unflattering light gray shirt I was wearing while giving a presentation. It was one of my first presentations on mental fitness in the serious working world. I was a fresh uni graduate, super motivated, and at the same time, very nervous. I never considered myself the born public speaker. So there I was, a bit clumsy with a laser pointer, a shaking voice, and weak knees. The thing was, especially because I was so young, I wanted to come across especially professional, experienced, and competent. Admitting how nervous I was did not fit that profile. I felt helpless, exposed, and, to be honest, ashamed. It wasn't fear of a blackout. It was being ashamed for not being able to hide my nervousness. Of all of them, shouldn't I be the one keeping a cool head when talking about mental fitness? Isn't it somehow hypocritical to give tips on something you apparently don't manage yourself? Okay, please don't let me down here and comment one of your epic fails that you were ashamed of so we can remove any taboos on the topic of shame. Because negative emotions like shame, embarrassment, or also guilt are not always as bad as they feel. Retrospectively, this situation has made me come out more confident than ever before. I'll get to that. But first, let's talk theory. In psychology, shame, guilt, and embarrassment are put into the category of self-conscious emotions. As the name suggests, they involve how we perceive ourselves. They are probably the most private emotions we can feel, and yet so important for our social interactions. They signal us how well or poorly we behaved according to social standards. Imagine you're at a party and make a joke below the belt. You and your friends have a lot of fun, and perhaps you also feel a bit proud that you were so quick-witted. Okay, and now imagine making the same joke at the office. Depending on your organizational culture, you might realize this joke was a bit inappropriate and perhaps feel embarrassed or even ashamed for not being able to hold it back. The same behavior would elicit very different emotions depending on the social context. They give you feedback on how well your behavior fits the situation. In my example, shame suggested to me that showing my nervousness was not appropriate for my goal to come across super professionally. How accurate that feedback really is a different question. We'll get to that. Self-conscious emotions are special in several ways and differ from the so-called basic emotions, namely fear, sadness, anger, happiness, disgust, or surprise. Evolutionarily, basic emotions have ensured our survival and reproduction. Fear was important, so we were prepared for potential threats. Disgust was necessary, so we wouldn't eat anything toxic, for example. Anger provided us with the energy needed to defend ourselves. And that's why basic emotions develop quite early, within the first 9 months of life. Interestingly, all basic emotions have a unique, universally recognized facial expression. This makes sense if we think about it. When experiencing these fundamental emotions, we often need to react very quickly. So communicating the message run or watch out with a facial expression that is automatically triggered in a split second comes quite handy. For self-conscious emotions, things are more complex. In contrast to basic emotions, they are said to promote social goals. We want to get on well with others and therefore try to behave according to social norms. Just recall the example of making the same joke in 2 different contexts. If our behavior deviates from the social norm, self-conscious emotions like guilt or shame serve the purpose of revealing the discrepancy and warning us to not do that behavior again. Since they're not directly crucial for our survival, although they can be indirectly, they develop a bit later. An early form of embarrassment can already develop between the age of 18 and 24 months, but more complex forms like shame or guilt or even positive self-conscious emotions like pride emerge even later, possibly by the end of the 3rd year of life. And they continue to develop over the years. Some researchers explored the occurrence of guilt and shame in relation to brain development during adolescence. For example, shame was linked to age-related changes in areas of the prefrontal cortex during adolescence, which makes sense since the prefrontal cortex is involved in self-referential thinking. Since we already know each other on a personal level, here's another story from when I was a child. I don't remember the exact age, but I think it was sometime in preschool when I was so tired in the morning that I forgot to take off my pajama and put on my normal clothes on top of it. Yes, this is how I left the house and spent my day in school. Apparently, my parents were still tired too, that they didn't notice either. I don't even remember that situation. This is only something that my siblings bring up every now and then. So as far as I remember, I didn't feel ashamed back then. If this is how I showed up at the office today, I think I'd be very embarrassed. But thank God a child's brain is not fully developed yet, so these thought processes involving the self in a social context aren't as deep yet. Okay, back to the topic. Also, when it comes to the nonverbal expression, self-conscious emotions differ from basic emotions. Rather than simple, short messages like run or watch out, they convey more complex messages. Perhaps I feel terrible about misbehaving and making you feel uncomfortable, in the case of guilt. Or I am a terrible person. Apparently, I'm not even able to handle this situation, in the case of shame. Our smart body took that into account and connected them with a more complex nonverbal expression. Self-conscious emotion combine facial expressions with bodily postures or head movements. Perhaps you're slumping your shoulders, tilting your head to the side, or making yourself smaller when feeling ashamed. One theory says that this helps us to regulate and hide these emotions better compared to basic emotions. Most of our facial muscle contractions are involuntary and therefore more difficult to consciously regulate. This is quite useful if you think about cultures or contexts where expressing certain emotions may be maladaptive. For example, it's considered inappropriate to express pride in some cultures. Here it might be more adaptive to hide pride rather than having it written all over one's face, literally. So while on stage, I could at least hide my shame, if not my nervousness. If we zoom in a little closer, we can even unravel how shame developed. It has to do with the attributions we make. When we believe we could have put in more effort to do something else to prevent the failure from happening, we probably feel guilty. If I knew that writing flashcards or practicing my talk once more would have prevented my sweat glands from working at full speed, yet didn't do it, yeah, there would have been guilt and regret. But attributing it to something more global, something that is expressive for who I am as a person, likely elicits shame. When we feel this is not only an undesired behavior, but something closer to our identity, it seems harder to change, uncontrollable, and quite often triggers feelings of helplessness or worthlessness. If you've watched our other videos, this attribution style may be familiar to you.
People with a fixed mindset, sometimes also called entity theorists, believe that their personal qualities are inborn and stable. But then there are also people with a growth mindset, or incremental theorists. These people believe that it just needs enough effort to develop skills and abilities.
Indeed, guilt proneness has been linked to a growth mindset, attributing success and failure to the amount of effort we put in, while shame proneness has been linked to a fixed mindset where people believe their skills and abilities are stable and impossible to change. Remember when I said earlier, I never considered myself the born public speaker?
I never considered myself the born public speaker.
There we go. This is what I mean. When feeling shame, we become masters at overgeneralizing. But let me tell you, the seemingly all-encompassing discomfort of shame is only the outer shell. We can break through it if we dare to look closer. I know for myself that avoidance is the most tempting reaction to shame, but we can learn to cope with it. Because in the end, I feel that I've grown from these experiences. It seems almost too simple, but one question that helped me change my perspective was, is it really necessary to feel ashamed in this situation? You know by now that shame is supposed to make us aware of the discrepancies between where we are now and the social goals we want to achieve. But thinking about it in peace made me realize that I don't need to be ashamed of being human. So while I was trapped in overgeneralizing negative thoughts about myself in that moment, I had the mental capacity to consciously think about the global positive aspects this situation revealed about myself afterwards. I can also reframe openness about being nervous as being authentic and approachable. What if I keep my calm despite these obvious stress symptoms? Isn't this something that could even inspire others to let go of embarrassment or shame in similar situations too? I'm not trying to hide it anymore. The opposite is actually true. Oftentimes, I deliberately pick up on that and use it as an example in workshops where we explain mental fitness topics. And guess what? I even got positive feedback on exactly that. People had the impression that I was authentic and that speaking in front of a crowd comes quite easily to me. This might not be transferable to all situations where we feel shame, of course. Because if we come to the conclusion that shame was kind of appropriate in that situation, perhaps you said something that hurt another person, guilt or shame is our feedback. But this is exactly how we can treat these emotions, as feedback, nothing more. Something we can learn from for the future. Something that shows us which social groups we belong to or want to belong to. Understanding the needs and rights of other people too. We can genuinely apologize, but then also treat ourselves with self-compassion to avoid drowning in shame, guilt, or embarrassment. If you need inspiration for that, you can check out our video on how to let go of self-criticism, or also the one on how to cultivate a positive self-talk. But one thing I'd like to leave you with for today is don't feel bad about feeling ashamed. We don't talk a lot about this emotion in our society, which is literally a shame. But it is absolutely human. In order to change that though, I'd be super happy if you leave a comment with an epic fail of yours, something embarrassing that maybe wasn't that bad after all. Perhaps running around with spinach between your teeth, making awkward small talk at a party, or getting caught while lying. Thanks so much for watching. If you learned anything new today, please make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the Flow Lab channel for more mental fitness content. I know we only touched upon the topic of guilt today. If this is something you're interested in, just let us know and we can make a more extensive video on that as well. Otherwise, I wish you a fantastic day and see you soon.